I mean, I've been doing
Now, it's time for Modern Money Doughnuts with Stephen Hale and Gabrielle Bond.
Hi everyone, my name's Gabrielle Bond. I'm the organiser for the Sustainable Prosperity Action Group here in Adelaide, South Australia. This is a group of activists who are campaigning about MMT and climate action. And I'm also the director of Modern Money Lab, which is a think tank focusing on MMT and ecological economics. And I'm part of that along with Stephen, who's my co-interviewer, and also Philip Lawn, who is an ecological economist in South Australia. Stephen?
Thanks very much, Gabby. I'm an economist with Modern Money Lab with Gabby, and I'm also adjunct associate professor at Torrens University here in Adelaide. Our guest today is Maren Poitras. Maren is associate producer with Codebreaker Films on two recently released features. One was Enemies of the State, and the other one was United States versus Reality Winner. Her current film in production, Finding the Money, won the Audience Award at DocLands Film Festival, DocPitch 2021. She has produced, directed, and shot issue-based media for clients ranging from congressional candidates in the US to environmental non-governmental organizations. Maren has a background in environmental science and agriculture with a bachelor's from UC Berkeley. She currently resides off-grid in Western North Carolina. So welcome, Maren. Maren should be joining us now.
Fingers crossed.
Hi.
And here she is. Hello. Lovely to see you again.
Yeah, so good to see you guys. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm really excited for your new adventure here.
Well, thanks for coming on. I greatly admire you for taking on a project like this movie. What motivated you to do it in the first place?
Yeah, it's a great question because it certainly is a daunting task. I don't know if I would recommend it to anyone else, but it's it's been a long process, and as most documentaries are, they usually take, especially for a first feature, many years to produce and complete. And I guess I started researching this topic a while back because as you know, my background's kind of in environmental science, agriculture, climate change, of course, and it's like these are such big societal issues. I guess I wanted to spend my energy where I could to address the root cause of these big issues. I was getting kind of tired of fiddling around the edges, right? And so, of course, that really kind of led me to the economic system. And I'm like, okay, it's got to be something in the economic system, right? And you just have kind of an inkling that something isn't right with economics. Like it doesn't always make intuitive sense. And I think I took a environmental economics course in college, and it just did not make any sense. It was very frustrating. And, that they could say that the economy will grow forever, on a finite planet, and there's no problem with that.
Yeah.
And other fundamental assumptions. And so I started there. And then I guess, I really kind of started with ecological economics. I think reading some great books put out, maybe like Enough is Enough, and basically just started getting my hands on what books I could, kind of living out here off grid. I had more time to read and just gather books. And so through that, I guess somehow I got cued in on the money piece and the money question. And the first thing that kind of sparked my interest was hearing that banks create money out of thin air, that they don't necessarily have to, have the money first, get deposits before they can make loans. I had never heard that before. And that just definitely sparked my interest and got me down this path to first kind of around ecological economics and then kind of the positive money folks. And that eventually brought me to MMT. And I was actually, very skeptical at first as well, and kind of reading all the debates between, I guess, positive money and MMT, which aren't as far apart as other groups, perhaps, but still
they've got nearer
still
too.
Some debate.
I think the gaps between the positive money people and MMT have got nearer. I like to think because the positive money people, most of them come to understand the monetary system better than maybe they did 5 years ago?
Yeah, it was about 4 or 5 years ago that I was kind of engaging with this. So and the public banking piece, I was in the Bay Area. There's like this great group, the public Friends of the Public Bank of the East Bay, I think it is now. It was Oakland, now it's East Bay, and so they're doing great stuff. But I guess MMT was just even a bigger picture, like even more exciting, and it just kind of like makes intuitive sense. Like even though I was skeptical at first and like
once you hear it,
back against it. Yeah, like once it started to click, I was like, this makes sense. And even just like the description of borrowing from China, like I think that really kind of won me over. But yeah, so it is just like, of course, the bigger picture pieces of the puzzle fitting into place and seeing like, oh, how could we not like, okay, how could we not know this already? And why is this kind of a revelation? And, kind of who knows what? I mean, why isn't this common knowledge? And that's always been kind of my driving question, I think, through all of this. And then just trying to tell it.
Question.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think a good way of introducing it actually is to play the trailer that you produced rather than to ask you to outline the basics of modern monetary theory, because I think the trailer does a great job doing that. Before we do this, I just want to mention that the trailer might not play perfectly through the app we're using. And this is no reflection on the movie or the trailer. If you go on to Maren's site, Finding the Money, let me just check out. One way of finding the movie is to go onto the filmmakers collaborative.org site and then / Finding the Money, and you can have a look at the trailer on there if it doesn't play great. Now,
it's also at the link that's at the bottom of the screen.
Okay. Oh yes, findingmoneyfilm.com. Thanks very much, Gabby. Let's try and play it. If we all mute.
I mean, I've been doing this now for a lot of years in mostly, I won't say hostile audiences, but in a sense, usually when I show up for an appearance, it's like walking into the lion's den.
Our next speaker is going to introduce this crazy radical idea that we maybe don't need to tax people in order to get their money to pay for things. Introducing this radical idea is Stephanie Kelton.
I come with an unconventional message. We think of spending and taxing as two sides of the same coin. If we want to fund a new program, the question is, how are you going to pay for it? Where will you get the money? You have to find the money. That's not how it works. Okay. The way that the conventional story goes, Uncle Sam needs money. If Uncle Sam wants to spend, Uncle Sam has to find some money. He can tax and he can borrow. Once it's collected the dollars, after that, it can spend. We flip that around completely.
An unconventional economic theory is gaining some traction. Modern monetary theory, MMT.
And one of its leading proponents is Professor Stephanie Kelton. She has advised Bernie Sanders' campaign.
She argues that almost everything we are told about the deficit is wrong.
We're $28 trillion in debt. There will be a day of reckoning.
If you're looking for more COVID bailout money, we don't have it.
How are we going to pay for it?
Congress has spent all the money.
You don't find the money.
It's not a matter of finding the money. They don't find the money, they create it. They create it through a keystroke.
Washington holds the power of the purse. They don't need to come to the rest of us to get dollars in order to be able to spend dollars. They're the source of the US currency.
Governments have to spend first. How can you tax back dollars that no one has?
In a real sense, it is as simple as that.
But there's nothing more deceptive than an obvious fact.
This idea of so-called modern monetary theory that all government debts can be paid by printing money.
First they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they fight you, and then you win. And for many years, we felt ignored.
You can't do what you're looking to do with $20 trillion in debt.
We want to lift this crushing burden of debt off of our children and grandchildren.
The government debt is not a burden on anyone.
It is exactly the opposite.
Zimbabwe printed more currency to pay its bills too.
That leads to inflation.
No. Inflation is the constraint. But at some point, they started laughing at us.
Modern monetary theory? I think of all the ideas I've ever heard in my lifetime, that's one of the stupidest.
We were always asking ourselves the question, do conventional economists understand what we're speaking of?
MMT is confused. The problem of deficits, of course, is that you have to pay back the money.
We do not have to repay the debt.
Or is it that they actually don't understand?
And then to the fight you stage. And so we're in the fight you stage.
Modern monetary theory tells us that the debt doesn't make. Theory is complete nonsense.
Bill Gates recently took exception with MMT, calling it crazy talk.
How are you going to pay for this?
America's broke.
Out of control debt.
The debt
that we are going to have to pay back.
We don't have any money.
The government doesn't need money. The government needs us to need money.
The difference is not a trivial one. It changes everything.
It changes our view of the nature of money.
The true story of money is not the story that I've been told.
That's so great. I love that teaser. Played really well as well. I can't wait for the movie. My favorite bit, I think, is Louis Yuil, when she says the government doesn't need our money. The government needs us to need its money. But really all the way through.
Yeah.
And Matt Forstater is absolutely right when he questions whether what he calls conventional economists understand. It's not that when they criticize modern monetary theory, in almost all cases, we're not really having a proper debate with them very often because they haven't engaged with the ideas well enough. They haven't engaged, and I gather you do this in the movie, with the history of money sometimes. So they don't fully understand the nature of money. Even Nobel Prize winning economists like Paul Krugman often just miss the point. But Gabby, you wanted to ask some questions.
Oh yeah, I've got a ton of questions actually. Yeah. Perhaps just because we tend to go a little bit too long on these things because we get too interested in what our guests are saying. But could you perhaps just tell us when we might be able to see the full movie and how we might access that in the future, just so that people can remember to look out for it and make sure they go and see it.
Hello.
Support it.
If Maren can hear us. We've lost her. We've lost Maren from.
What a shame.
Well, let's talk a little bit.
Yeah,
about,
I mean, I think. Yeah, so the idea about whether the people who are in charge of the joint, so to speak, actually know how this works and are misleading all of us deliberately, or whether they genuinely don't understand it, I think is something that comes up as a question quite often for us. And it would seem that it's the latter, that they genuinely don't get it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
It goes all the way back, as I think Maren's coming back again.
Yeah,
I was going to be describing. That's all right. It's great to see you again. I was just going to answer one of Gabby's questions, actually, which is about the importance of the history of money and going all the way back, as I think your movie does, to Mesopotamia. And could you just tell us something, because we can't see that in the clip, something about how you're going to do that in the movie and why it's important?
Yeah. I think it's really important, and it's really what kind of convinced me, I guess, and it was just so compelling to see the history too. And I think I didn't fully grasp MMT until I kind of understood a different way of thinking about the nature of money and the story that we tell about money. And so I think it all comes back to these kind of very old stories about money. And the MMT story, I think, is very different than the conventional story, which I posit the conventional story is maybe what we call the myth of barter, the story of barter, and proposing these very different kind of examples of money through time. I mean, we often only hear about money being gold, let's say, or gold coins, and it's so strong in our psyche, I think, to think of money as an object, especially, a chunk of gold that just has value in and of itself because it's a commodity and it's scarce, and that kind of determines its value. So the historical pieces are going to be introduced throughout. They'll kind of weave throughout the film to help give clues and like drive the narrative forward. So, we kind of have the narrative arc of MMT and their kind of rise towards success, and it's almost like a hero's journey, really. Kind of we're following this underdog group. But along the way, you kind of need to learn the pieces of the puzzle almost in the right order in order for that to also make sense. And that thread to also have its own kind of conflict and its own kind of mystery and tension that it's building. And so the historical pieces will be introduced, but also like hopefully lend a little bit of mystery as well, and kind of give you these clues, but maybe everything doesn't come together until a certain way through. But some of the examples we're definitely using are like tally sticks in medieval England, and maybe paper in the US colonies, and maybe the African colonies as well. But I just love the tally stick example so much because it's so visual, and I think the number one revelation that I do want to get across in the film is this idea that money always has two sides, that there's the debt and the credit. And for me, like, until I understood that one piece, I just don't think I got it. And I think that's what helps me understand what the national debt is. And that we can think
it's a
about
mirror.
it. Exactly. It's just like this idea of two balancing sides, right? And the tally stick. So how we're going to do it is through animation illustration. So I've got a great illustrator who we worked with to produce a sample of the tally stick scene. So we have that kind of done as a proof of concept that we include in our work samples when we're out fundraising. And so the idea is, to kind of have this painterly look, this almost like 17th century oil painting. We just paint the picture of this time and place and just kind of move through a scene with some movement. And so it really helps to have the visuals, right, for a film. And so sometimes this film is like a little bit abstract, right? But I think it's also very that we need to visualize it, that we need to start visualizing what money actually is, not as a lump of gold or as a piece of paper. Like it's not the object, it's kind of, there's something underneath that's not always visible to the naked eye. And that's what we really want to visualize using graphic animation as well. So we have the historical interludes, but then we also have this other kind of graphic animation that's going to overlay over more of the modern interviews and B-roll as well. And so that gets to a lot, but I think it's really one of the main features of the film is to be able to visualize money in a very different way that has never been visualized before. And I think if we remember and we think about money as always keeping track of that plus and minus, like money having these two sides, the debt and the credit, the plus and the minus. And if you remember that it's always got those two sides, then you won't kind of lose track of, you won't kind of get confused when you hear like, oh, there's just this pool of savings that exists in the world and the government needs to borrow from that savings. But it's like, well, where did they come from and where are they going?
I love that comment that was doing the rounds on social media where it says, world debt is such and such $1 trillion. And then someone writes underneath, well, who do we owe this to? Aliens? It's just...
Exactly. And so that's my, this big question is, who understands what, shouldn't we know what money is and what debt is, especially if it's a man-made concept? It seems that we should know what it is and how it works. And yet so many folks don't. And that was kind of my big goal, was to go around and talk to a variety of different economists for the film and try to figure out kind of who's thinking what and kind of where are the mistakes happening, or where is kind of the core of where the divergence happens, or the core of the misunderstanding, or the core of the conflict. And I guess for me personally, through the journey, I've figured out it really is kind of that core understanding of our story of money, and where it comes from and who creates it and how it's created. So the nature of money.
Imagine
Go on, Gabby.
So imagine, when the film comes out and all these people are seeing this for the first time, imagine how different their understanding is going to be and what they can do with that new knowledge. That's what's exciting to me. So I'm really hoping that you can tell us where we might go to find the film and how we can support it, and when we might be needing to look out for its debut.
Yeah, well, I would love to be able to tell you more, but we're progressing now. We've almost got our first rough cut, so that's a really important kind of milestone. But it is independently produced, so we don't have a distribution yet, and that kind of comes with independent films. It can come really at any stage. Someone could get on board and say, okay, we're going to buy and distribute the film. So we're going to pitch sessions and applying for grants to connect with other funders as well as distributors, because we've raised about a quarter of the budget that we need. And we've been able to do everything pretty low budget until now. But a lot of the costs come in post-production, which is kind of the animation that I mentioned, the illustration, sound design, like original music. And those things are really important. Color correction, all that kind of stuff, that's really the bulk of the budget comes at this later stage. But at least like funders know that it's real. There's a rough cut, there's a story there, so it's a little bit easier to raise funds at that point. But we've been really lucky. We had a successful crowdfunding campaign, really thanks to the MMT community, got donations from around the world. So I was just so thankful
so people
for
can
that.
go to your website and donate.
Yeah, so on the website, there should be a link to my fiscal sponsor, which is, the Filmmakers Collaborative SF, and you can donate through them. It's tax deductible, in the US at least. And so it's totally tax deductible. I'm also taking on investors. So documentaries are kind of weird. You can have investors and nonprofit tax deductible donations. And so we've been lucky. We've got a couple investors and grants, and then the crowdfunding. And the crowdfunding is really what sparked it. So I'm always really thankful for that. but yeah, so I will. So also sign up for the mailing list on my website, and that would be the best way to keep in touch about as soon as we know anything about distribution or finalizing it. But the goal is definitely within a year.
We've got dozens, if not hundreds, of people who would love to see this film just in our city. So, really very excited.
Yeah. And so maybe it'll play festivals, or maybe it'll go on streaming really quick. So that's kind of the idea, is you kind of have like a premiere, a big exciting festival premiere, maybe you get a sale, and then you get on an international streaming site. So that's definitely the goal. But we'll need help, kind of marketing and spreading it and getting that kind of social media buzz, or just that natural kind of organic spread that you get, because Netflix might not be posting it on their front page. We don't know yet.
Yeah.
We'll be promoting it all over Australia when it comes out. I heard you
such
say
a useful tool in our toolkit, because we're trying to express these things, but we don't have a beautiful and kind of self-contained piece of art that people can see. Anyway, it's very exciting for us.
I heard you say on another interview that MMT was the biggest story in the world. And I think appreciating that money, that thing that everybody takes for granted, didn't, whatever generations of economics textbooks have told people, didn't emerge out of a pre-existing barter system with governments coming along later on and stealing people's money and messing everything up, but in fact was invented by the earliest effectively tax collecting governments, and actually money came first and sophisticated organized markets came later, and that to this day every dollar that the US federal government spends is a new dollar, that they don't need our dollars, they need us to need their dollars, as Lewis said in the clip. That is such an important insight. And once people understand that, which I think your movie is going to get over incredibly well, because just those few minutes that we just watched got that over. It's very, very empowering. And the movie you couldn't be making this movie at a better point in time. either. It's the timing is so great. It was marvelous to watch those interviews we just watched. I know you were going to see Warren Mosler at some point. Has that happened yet?
Not yet. I'm working on it. I'm working on trying to get down there. But yeah, COVID has kind of slowed things down, I think, a little bit.
Of course.
So,
Are you going to go to the Virgin Islands?
Yeah, I'm hoping to very soon, if he lets me. So yeah, we are working hard on that. Because he's such, if you think about the story as like a hero's journey, in the typical kind of Star Wars film, he's really kind of the Yoda, right? And Stephanie and the others are kind of the Jedis, and so it really is so essential to tell, I think, and to connect with, like, there's such good characters involved, and so you need to kind of connect with them and also build a little bit of trust for them, and to understand Warren's background is just this kind of really interesting logical thinker who is able to take a step back and look at the big picture from not only monetary operations but also engineering boats and cars and all the other things that he does. And so I think that's just such interesting background that's important for the story itself, right? And so so I really want to present this first and foremost as an entertaining story, and it has that because it's great characters, tons of drama and conflict, and that's kind of the key of any story. And so it has all that, but then it also has so much political relevance and huge stakes for whether they're going to win or lose, right? Like, I do think it's the biggest story in terms of whether we're going to survive as a species and whether a lot of other species are going to survive. And so that's obviously what drives me. And so, yeah, I always kind of feel compelled and an urgent need to get this out sooner rather than later, because I kind of know the clock is ticking on climate change. And I do share, with a lot of MMTers share the idea that this is kind of the key obstacle that's presented to doing something about climate change is the question of how are you going to pay for it? And even deeper than that, not just how are you going to pay for it, but, does the government even have any right or should play any role in the economy? And I think that's where the story of money, not only do completely, I think what the story of money does at the core, and what I want to get to as the deepest part, the deepest level of the story, is to use the story of money to show really the place of governments and markets in the economy, right? So when we, like you were just telling the story, if the conventional story says, first there are markets, the markets invented money, and then the government came along much later to take some of that money away for its own uses and taxing you and so forth. But if it's actually the other way around, that the government starts first, like political authorities develop, and they invent money not to make trade easier, but they invent money to make taxation easier, to move resources, right, as a tool to move resources. And so it's this human invention for a specific purpose. And then much later, we choose to create markets as a distributive mechanism, but it's always chosen, right? It's like, who has the agency to choose to make these choices and to kind of, decide how we're going to organize ourselves in a society. And luckily today, we have democracies. And so I think it's our right as every voter and every participant in society to participate in these economic questions, right? It's not just for the experts. When we realize that economics is really politics at its core, that's what it is. It's up to us to write the rules and choose what kind of world we want. And if we want to live in a sustainably prosperous world, we can choose that. And I don't think we're empowered to know that we have that choice without this different kind of story about money, because otherwise we think money is just too powerful and there's nothing we can do against this kind of overwhelming force that is money, and that is, kind of inequality. This is just nature. This is just the way it is. You can't do anything. The rich are always going to be rich and the poor are going to be poor. And so, and that the government will just mess everything up if they try to transition our economy to a more sustainable one to avert climate change. Like, they'll just say that'll destroy everything, right? Like, the government has no role to play in the economy. And so if we think about it differently and understand money as this, right, the most important thing, like understanding money as a public tool, and a tool that we've created, and we need to learn how to use that tool to better society. I think that's the most important thing that I want people to come away with.
What a fantastic way to wrap up. I know I'm going to go back onto Maren's site and donate some more money towards making this movie, because I think it's so important. I'd like to urge everybody else that's got a few dollars available to do the same thing, because I really want to see this movie come out as soon as possible. I want to thank Maren again for making
thank
it.
you so much.
And what you were just talking about, we are going to next week talk to our dear friend Phil Lawn, who is, if you're talking about people who bridge the gap between modern monetary theory and ecological economics, he is basically the Warren Mosler of that area. So it'll be fantastic to talk to Phil. We're going to ask him what the word degrowth means, and then just listen to him talk about that for the next half an hour. After that, which will be marvelous. In half an hour's time, Joe Firestone will be on this link. If people want to watch Joe's show, it's great every week.
Stick around.
Did you want to add anything else, Gabby?
Well, I was just thinking, as you were talking about sort of climate activism led you towards a better understanding of economics, and to seek out that, trying to understand how this world that we're operating in, which is kind of feels like it's against us, and so many hurdles that we have to push through. And thinking of people that I know who are trying to do the same thing, but perhaps with law like climate litigation, and perhaps with activism like Extinction Rebellion, and the whole theory about having 3.5% of the people mobilized. I think as an ecosystem of people who are trying to act on climate change, I think the role that you're playing and the role that we're playing as well is something that will only make others stronger.
Everybody has to do whatever they can do, and what you've done with this movie, and what you are doing with this movie, is really amazing. Thank you very much, Maren.
I'm trying. I can't wait till it's done. So I will look forward to letting you know. It's a long journey, but we're getting closer every day.
Well, let's have you on again when we can direct people to go and see it, because I think that would be terrific.
It would be
very excited.
Fantastic.
Perfect.
Well, thanks very much, Maren, and good evening.
Yeah,
good
thank
luck.
you for your guys. Thank you for
Good
your
luck with
work
the next
too.
stage.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a good night.